Alrighty, welcome to Flask, everybody. We are going to be making a Phonebook application. Flask has a lot of parts. It's pretty cool. We'll be making a full back-end application that does return some front-end stuff too. We've talked about what those things mean already, so I don't need to explain that. But we'll be making this. This is going to be the thing that we're actually making, this Phonebook application. And users will be able to create and update, delete, and view contacts. So they'll be able to log in, they will be able to create contacts, and they can give them phone numbers and emails and names and addresses and save that stuff. And then they'll be able to upload that and view it as a collection later on. So let's go ahead and get started. First things first, let's go ahead and I'm going to clear that. I'm going to so now I'm at my root directory. Actually, one more thing. We'll talk about what all that means in a second. But right now, I'm at the beginning. Right, this is what you would see when you first open your terminal or your CLI. And I'm going to move to my documents and move to coding temple self paste. I'm going to move to my Flask folder, which I've made. Okay. And then I'm going to cd to the in-class code along. I'm going to open that up in VS Code. Woo, here we are. All right, now you might not have all this stuff yet. That is okay. All of it is just empty. And so all that we're doing in this video is we're just going to talk about this file structure, what each of these things does so that you can revisit it later. I highly recommend as we make this application that you kind of remind yourself of what each one of these different folders and Python files actually means. This is going to be a lot more work than previous assignments. Previously, we've had about a 1-day to 1 assignment ratio. Now what we'll be doing is we're going to be making an app kind of as we go, and then you're going to do the exact same thing and make your own app afterwards. But this will take us quite a few videos to get through this whole project, much more like some of our CSS, HTML stuff. This will be a lot of videos. But we're going to go through this piece by piece. So first of all, I have this main app, right? So here's the folder that we're in, is the in-class code along. And inside of it, I have an app, which is a folder, and then I've got 4 files. If I were to go back over here, right, and have it list out what's in here, you can see I've got an app folder, and then I've got 4 Python files, right? So that's kind of the main thing there. You guys can go ahead and write out config.py, forms.py, helpers.py, and models.py. Again, right now they're all empty. And then once you have that done, again, you can pause the video anytime. I won't be offended. You're going to open up the app folder, and inside of this, you'll have 5 other folders and another Python file. I'll explain why this works in a moment. But for right now, we've got an API folder, an authentication folder, a site folder, a static folder, a templates folder, and a dunder-init.py file. Now, again, it is important that we name these things the same things. I know I have a temptation to name things silly things because I think it's fun, but Flask is going to look for things with specific names. App, for example, is going to be really important that we name that right. The init.py, that's going to be really important that we name that the right thing. Config, same deal. Okay, but we'll talk about which one of these things does. So these files out here are all kind of meant to work around our app to help configure it. That's what the config does, right? Is it helps our computer and our app kind of talk to each other. Especially once we deploy onto the real interwebs. You may have noticed that this is not a local host. This is an actual website name. So if you were to type this into your browser, you'd be able to go to my website. Pretty neat. But the config allows us to, when we put it on the actual internet, it allows our application to talk to the internet. The forms is a helper file that allows us to ensure that users are giving us the right data, right? Like if they're giving us an email address, we have to make sure that it is an actual valid email address. And so that's what that file will do. The helpers file ends up actually, give me a second. The helpers file helps us with some other functions, and it especially helps us make sure that users can log in correctly and make sure that the users have the right to access our API data. We'll get to that later. We'll talk about what API is, but basically think about your contacts, right? You make a phone book with contact information, and you only want people who are allowed to see that to be able to see that, right? So got to be a little bit careful with that one. And then we have models.py, and that will help us with our databases. That will help us so we don't have to write SQL tables and SQL queries and all that other stuff. We will actually automate a lot of that stuff from this point going forward. So pretty neat. All right. And then inside the app, we have these folders. The API, this is going to be all of our data and all of the kind of the rules for how outside entities like other back-end applications or a front-end application would be able to talk to our app and say, hey, I'd like this data. And we're going to tell them what they have to request to get the data. And we're going to tell them how to kind of parse that, some of the rules for that, how they can add data, how they can delete data, that kind of thing. That's where we're going to put all of the rules for that. Authentication should be pretty straightforward. That's going to be all of our rules about creating users, logging them in, and logging them out, right? Because people are going to be able to sign into our website and make accounts, and then they'll have the access to the data. Our site is going to be the rules for our web pages, right? So our home page here, that's where we're going to put the data for that and say, hey, when you go to this location or that location, load these different web pages. So that's just for basically the website. Static is going to be important that we call it that because Flask knows to look for images inside the static folder. CSS and images are both going to live inside of there because they don't change, right? They're just going to stay the same way. That's all groovy. And then templates we'll talk about in the next couple of videos, but we are basically going to be using HTML templates so that we end up automating a lot of our work and we don't have to do as much work every single time we want to make a new page. It will keep our websites consistent. It will keep it running smooth. It'll be very nice. And then finally, our init.py. This is going to be the file where we actually run most of our logic. This is going to be the file where we end up actually running the app, where we instantiate all of our classes and get all the parts moving all at once. This is kind of where everything is pointing to and how things are going to roll. So that's our little intro to our Flask app. The next video, we're going to start populating the init.py, and then we're going to start working on our site folder after that. Should be pretty cool. See you soon.